and welcome to Dregs of Wisdom with Andrew Tanner.
Hey everyone, this is Dregs of Wisdom, episode 11. We are here with a very special guest, someone who I'm really excited to interview. This is Nikki Myers. She has an MBA and is an ERYT 500, very well known in the yoga scene. She's a yoga therapist, a somatic experiencing practitioner, addiction recovery specialist, and an Ayurvedic specialist, basically like the triumvirate of yoga knowledge. But most important, what Nikki is famous for is being the founder and creator of Yoga for 12-Step Recovery, Y12SR, which is a program, a relapse prevention program that weaves yoga, Vedanta, neuroscience, and trauma healing with practical tools of the 12-step and cognitive behavioral programs. And her programs are available internationally. They've been featured in the New York Times, Black Enterprise, HuffPo, Origin Magazine, CBS News, and really countless podcasts, which I guess I'm going to add to that list. She's also been a speaker at International Association of Yoga Therapists Conference, International Conference on Integrative Medicine at Harvard Medical School, and she was also a speaker at the 2022 Clinton Global Initiative. She'll also be speaking at the Berkshire Yoga Festival. We're putting it on this summer, and we are so excited to have you here, Nikki. Thank you so much. Before we get into everything, a very important first question. I see myself as the avatar incarnation of Amaterasu from Japan. Who would you say is your avatar that you are embodying in this lifetime?
Wow, that's a great question. And it has multiple answers. I always think about how the Divine Mother has 1,000 names, right? and so I know that it is the Divine Mother. And at various points, I take on the personality and the identity and the incarnation of many of those 1,000 names. Some of them are quite fierce. In this moment, there's a little Kali energy that's really brewing. So I'll say that. Yeah.
Kali, the goddess of wrath, right? She's what is Kali's? Do you know how much of Kali's story do you know? I know she stands on the head of the evildoers, right?
Right. I don't know I would never say that I knew the totality of Kali's story, but I have studied that quite a bit. And Kali is always this fierce ass person for the good, right? For the good, right? She's willing to cut off a head. She's willing to do those kinds of things for the good. And so that's what resonates within me.
Wow. Well, it's interesting. I've been absorbing a lot of your videos and kind of listening to your talks, and the way that you normally introduce yourself is kind of unique. I don't know if you wanted to. I kind of shared all of the things that are not in the shadow, if we say, but I don't know, if you want to go through that whole thing, or I will just say that in every video I've seen you talk, you don't just say all the positive things about your identity. You talk about a lot of the, calling yourself an addict and other things.
All of it.
Can you tell people why do you do that? And how do you identify? How do you see yourself?
I love that you asked that question. First of all, I want to back up a little bit and say, I absolutely love the name of this podcast, Dregs of Wisdom. Yeah. I love it.
You get it.
We love it. Yeah. And part of it goes with the question you just asked. Part of this discovery and reintegration with me and who I am, it called for a dregging, if you will, of a lot of things. It called for that. So just to give a brief version of it, I usually introduce myself the whole way. I'm Nikki, I'm a yoga therapist, I'm all the things you said, a somatic experiencing practitioner, all of those things, ... and the big 3-letter word is and, right? And I'm an addict, I'm an alcoholic, I'm a codependent, I'm the survivor of both childhood and adult sexual trauma. I'm a love addict. I'm a recovering debtor spender. I'm a former commercial sex worker. And I'm the mother of 2 living and 1 deceased child. I'm the grandmother of 5. I'm actually now the great grandmother of 7.
Whoa.
Right? I know. Blows my mind. I'm the great grandmother of 7. Yeah. And right, I'm a lover of all things nature. I'm a lover of life. I am, all of those things, right? And I'm a lover of all things dogs, right? Hopefully you won't hear them in the background, but I love saying it with that and, because part of this journey, part of this dragging has been in the recognition that all of those in some way, and there's so much more I could put in there. I'm a Black woman who was raised in the Midwest. I was, all of those things have an influence in who it is that I am today, right? And all of those experiences in some way it informs who you see right in front of you, right? And I've learned that when I ignore, deny, or pretend, or create some kind of pretense, when I make one part of myself right and wonderful and praiseworthy, and another part of myself bad and wrong, what gets created, what happens inside is a war. There's chaos. There's a split, right? And so part of the big healing for me has been in reintegrating all those parts, right? This is like parts work, right? And it's the recognition that there's a we inside of me. There's a we inside of me. And, how do we all work together?
It's interesting because I have 2 questions related to that whole sharing. The first is that you've often said, after sharing all those things, or at least I've heard you say this at least once, and none of them define me.
And none of them define me.
Yeah.
Right? All of them inform this walk in this plane of existence, this walk of humanity, and none of them define me, right? In the world of spirit, all that shit's meaningless.
Right.
All of it.
And we talk about our identities all day, but it's like at the greatest level.
Right. And I'm walking in this plane of existence, right? I got a teacher that always says, we're citizens of 2 worlds. And one is the world of divinity. The other one is the world of humanity. And we're citizens of both. And in this world of humanity, right, there are all of these things that inform the walk in the world of humanity. In the world of spirit, all that stuff's meaningless, right? And I'm a citizen of both worlds.
Do you? And I truly feel and believe that. And I feel like I'm curious. A lot of people these days can say, I'm this, I'm that, I'm Jewish, I'm Black, I'm whatever, the thing. And they have these identities. And then, but not everyone says, and I'm, and none of these define me. Like they don't, or even when they say maybe none of those define me, there's a lack of a real sense that they are also the infinite, eternal, soul, whatever it is that is beyond name and form. How do you, do you notice that there's a difference, because you are an actual practitioner of yoga and you've when did you have that realization, that last part? And what was that like for you?
Wow. It continues to unfold. And part of the reason is there is a pull in this world of humanity, right? The part of the operating system, if you will, in this world of humanity is duality, is separation, right? It's part of the operating system. So my building capacity, right? And that's what yoga is for me, It's building this capacity to hold opposites is part of what yoga is for me. Again, that in this plane of existence, which is the operating system, if you will, in this plane of existence, is duality, right? It's the good, bad, right, wrong, inferior, superior, loss, gain, all of those kinds of things, right? So just to, one of the phrases, we haven't gotten into this yet, but from 12-step programs that I absolutely love is we keep coming back. We keep coming back, right? And this idea for me to keep coming back to, when I'm recognized that I'm in these dualities, right? To keep coming back to this place, which is center, which is who it is that I really am, that's beyond all of those dualities, right?
Right. You said something like, in one of your quotes, you said, whenever we feel stressed or triggered, etc., we are time traveling.
Yep.
Can you explain that a little more for everyone?
Yeah, I can know it and I can feel it, right? And I think about this from Ayurveda perspective, right? There's sattva, there's rajas, there's tamas, right? And we can think about that in many other ways as well. In medical science, in the world of who we are, at nervous system, there is homeostasis, right? And then there's hyper and there's hypo, right?
For those that don't know the Ayurveda, sattva is like balance, rajas is active, tamas is kind of down.
Yeah. So, and sattva's middle, right? So one of the practices, like homeostasis, is balance. It's middle, right? One of the practices that we often teach in the work that I do is how we keep coming back. We keep coming back to middle. When I'm in middle, right, then I'm not time traveling. I'm not in the future. I'm not in the past. I'm truly here, right, in the moment where there's choice and possibility, right?
Yeah, there's a quote from the Tao Te Ching. The Dregs of Wisdom, by the way, comes from these Taoist stories, and that's my whole spiritual background is more in Taoism. There's from the Tao Te Ching, it says, the action of the Tao is returning, or the direction of the Tao is return.
I love it.
I thought you can put that in as another quote.
I will do that.
I didn't know the 12 steps had that concept too. Of course, but of course it makes sense. They all do.
Yeah.
Let me see. Maybe you can talk a little before we get into, because I have a lot of questions for you about your methodology and kind of how you help people and codependency and all that stuff. But maybe before we get into that, you could share a little bit about your story of finding yoga. And I mean, actually, one more thing I'll say, when I noticed that you added lately of the last few years, you've been mentioning that you used to be a sex worker. And like, I was like, dang, she's admitting that. Like, you didn't need to do that. Like, you didn't have to bring that out.
Yeah.
How, I guess, for people working on integrating all their parts, is that something that you did in stages? Like, because I don't believe, I've known you for a while, I don't believe you used to share that piece of information. I think you shared that you were an addict, but not all that. So is that something that, can you talk a little bit about that, the process of welcoming all those parts in stages and how freeing or not or challenging that's been for you?
Yeah. Great question. It really was, because I have done that in stages. And it's not something I love to do it. Some of the result that I've seen from doing that is a lot of people at least willing to release pushing that part away, right? it was when I began to really recognize that there was so much wisdom in that girl, right? That there was so much wisdom in that girl. And
Interesting.
some of the qualities that it took to be in commercial sex work served me very, very, very well today, right?
Wow.
That girl was bold. That girl had a fearlessness to her. That girl had a resolve to her, and all of those individual qualities served me very well today, right? That girl had a reason and a purpose for doing the things that she did in that time, even though her actions weren't sustainable. They were absolutely not sustainable over time, right? For that moment, and in that moment, that girl did what she knew she needed to do, right? And that's a quality that I honor and that I love and that I respect and that serves me very well toward another purpose today.
Oh man, so many questions. Do you, as a grandmother and great grandmother and mother, and yogi, but who also has seen the power and beauty in the shadow of her past, do you think that sex work should be legalized today? Do you think it's kind of like, do you think it should be illegal, or I'm curious what your thoughts are on that today, or if you think about it at all.
I don't think about it at all, right?
Okay.
I really don't think about that at all. And I have still lots of interaction and work with sex workers, right? And so being able to be with sex workers that are really in active ideas of doing this, to stay healthy, stay focused, stay, within, to come back, to make their choices based on who it is that they really are, rather than some identity that's being imposed upon them, right? And when you make choices from that place, it's a whole different thing. But I don't really think about the legality of things per se. And I don't know why, right? I choose to give my focus toward the person that's in front of me rather than all the rest of that stuff. That's just my focus.
Totally fair enough. Yeah. It sounds like you try to help people through yoga. Well, actually, sorry, before we go there, can you tell us a little bit about your story? Just, where you grew up, how you kind of found yoga, how you, if you want to weave in, anything, we'd love to hear. I'd just love to spend a few minutes just hearing your story.
I love it. I love it. Thank you for asking that. Yeah. So I grew up exactly where I am right now, and I'm in Indianapolis, Indiana, right? I am right now probably less than 2 miles from the high school that I went to. I am probably 10 miles or less from the house that I grew up in. And a lot of my family's here. Now, I've been lots of other places. I came back to Indianapolis probably around 20 some odd years ago now to help or to support my mother in her transition, right? As she was leaving this plane of existence. And I haven't left. I'm still here. And my grandchildren are here. My great-grands are here and all of that, which is a key reason for me staying and being exactly where I am, very much active in their lives, very much active in their lives.
So you're here in Indianapolis, and and I guess you grew up with like brothers and sisters. Like, what was that like?
Yeah, I'm the youngest of 4. right? And one of the things that I noticed among many, and when I talk about my experience, I talk about early childhood sexual trauma. I talk about all of those things. And there were some key things that I noticed along the way. And what I'm getting to here is when I started first experimenting with alcohol and drugs, right? Now, I know it had to do with a lot of things, and a lot of times people will just make assumptions, right? Number one, because I'm Black, and because I grew up in I was born in 1953, right? And because it was in that era that I grew up in, I noticed that people make a lot of assumptions about that, right? And even though the part of my experience, the trauma in my experience that I explained, my parents were actually fabulous.
Wow.
Right. I grew up in a two-parent household. Right. And we were kind of the heroes of the neighborhood. Right. All the kids gathered at our house. My mother was an educator who, had a master's degree and the whole 9 yards. My father was in his own business. And I always love to point that out, because one of the things that when, I got to be a certain age, right, in that period of civil rights and Martin Luther King and, all of that.
You
all
were like
that
a
was
teenager, then that must have been.
Right. So I was like 10 years old in that point in time. And I remember having this experience during the course of all that. And I'm watching the authority figures in the United States, the police and all that kind of stuff, spray fire hoses. I'm 10 years old in Selma, Alabama, on people that look like me. And I'm being taught in school that these are the people who were, their job is to serve and that they were working to serve people, right? And then I'm watching this, and I remember that conflict in my own head, and then I remember how my mother and father worked so hard and said, get educated, and was doing all these things, stressing education, and yet they struggled. Right? They did all the things, and yet they struggled, right? There was so much struggle financially. We lived, I now know, in a redlined area in the United States. I mean, in Indianapolis, right? An area that was redlined. And by this time, I'm 13 or 14 years old. And I'm noticing all this. I'm trying to make sense of it. And I get what I love to call the fuckets, right?
Fuckets. Oh, I love it.
Like, fuck this. It ain't working. It ain't working. There's got to be another way. There's got to be another way. And, I grew up in that point in time where there was hippies and all of this. So there was an alternative way of beginning to think, right? And alcohol and drugs were a part of that, right? And
were you like a hippie? How would you define when you were like a teenager? That must have been early 70s.
Yeah.
Were you disco? Were you hippie? What was your thing?
I was all of that and a little bit more, right? Because there was
just like your bio. You couldn't pick one.
I couldn't pick one. But there was the civil rights movement. And so, I had thought and focus in what was going on there. And alcohol and drugs and dancing and sex and all of that kind of stuff. And that was where I was first introduced to yoga.
Really?
That was what, in that whole thing, right? In the 70s.
Do you remember your first teacher, or like your first real yoga experience that really touched you?
No, but what I do remember, one of the yoga experiences that really touched me was on TV. It was Lily Has Fallen.
Oh my
right?
gosh, yeah. I was at her 90th birthday party. Were you there?
Really?
At yoga journal. They did it like a yoga journal or something.
I love it. I love it. And she actually lives in the Midwest. It was not too far away from where I live. Yeah.
So your first, it was on TV, like it was like on the channel, like
that was that's a memory of the first intrigue in yoga. That is a memory of the first intrigue in yoga, right? And so there were some teachers, some local teachers around town, and I played with it for a minute, right? A short period of time. And then I always say drugs and alcohol and sex and bling and all of those kinds of things took my interest.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And I didn't return to it until the early 90s.
Okay.
Right. And then at that point in time, I had gotten clean. Right. I got clean for the first time. I'd been through the throes of all the stuff relative to addiction. My first rehab was in 1987.
Wow.
That's the first time I went to rehab. And there are relapses and stuff along the way, which is another whole story. But after rehab, I started getting, for whatever reason, I started getting interested in yoga again. Actually, it took a little bit. It was in the early 90s that I started getting interested in yoga. And by that time, I moved from Indianapolis to Boston. I was living in Boston.
You lived in Boston? That's where I'm from.
Oh, yeah.
Where were you living?
I didn't know that, Andrew.
Well, I live in the Berkshires. I live like 5 minutes from Kripalu, but I grew up in Needham.
You did?
Yeah. Where were you in Boston?
I lived in Waltham. I lived outside. I lived in Watertown.
Yeah.
All of that.
I was in Watertown and Waltham a lot. My dad has a sign shop for over 60 years. It's in his garage, but it was in Waltham and Watertown, and I used to work there in the summers. And
I love it.
That is so funny.
I love it. Yeah.
We were okay. Yeah. So you moved there in the 90s.
Right. And I found a yoga teacher.
Who was your teacher?
I don't remember names.
Okay.
Right. There's one in particular that I'm going to talk about. And for whatever reason, I was thinking about that when I was in the bathroom this morning. This is what happens when you're, at this age, the names start not as frequent. But I'll tell you this. I first found Bikram. Mm-hmm. And so I was doing hot yoga. And then I was introduced to Ashtanga. And I fell in love with the Ashtanga practice. And I had a fabulous Ashtanga teacher whose name is not coming to me right now. And she's a Black woman.
Huh.
Right?
Really? Right. Is she still alive?
Yes. And I can't remember her name right now.
My gosh, we got to find that out.
I know it. And I just...
Okay, we'll get it. We'll put it in the show notes. No worries.
Okay.
Beautiful goddess, we shout you out now. Her name is in the show notes.
She studied with Pattabhi Jois.
Huh.
And she used to go to India regularly to study with Pattabhi Jois. And what happened was, one time she went to India, she was doing a lot of work in Roxbury at a school, which at that time was very segregated. Yeah. Now it's been gentrified, right?
Yeah. Roxbury, when I was growing up, that's where we went to buy beer and we were under 18.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah.
She was doing some work at a middle school in Roxbury. And I had studied Ashtanga with her long enough that she asked me to sub while she went off to India. And it was that experience that I fell in love with yoga. It was that experience, subbing at that school.
I find that there are certain people I've met over the years, and this is a message I give to anyone who's a yoga teacher or thinking of being a yoga teacher. The best yoga teachers often, and this isn't a rule, but there's often one similar thing where the first time they taught a class, they hadn't gone through a yoga teacher training. It was just that they practiced with the same teacher so long that the teacher said, I'm going to be gone. Will you sub the class?
Yeah.
And that was how I taught my first class. I'm not trying to push myself up, but I think that there's something beautiful about that. It's like, that's like the old way, you know?
It was amazing. That experience really shifted everything for me. And it made me, what I noticed was these were middle school kids, right? And what not only I noticed, but the school administrators noticed. They would say, we don't know what's going on here, but after the experience of the yoga practice, and I was teaching them Ashtanga, right? Jump up, jump in, jump out.
That's the best yoga for kids, don't you think?
Yeah.
And for those that don't know, Ashtanga is like vigorous. It's basically, burpees in yoga form.
Yes. Exactly.
So they were having, I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead. I don't know if you.
I was just saying that the administrators noticed that after the yoga practice, that these kids had a different level of focus.
Yeah.
That they had a different level that they could stay seated.
Right.
There were all of these things. And that's not something that happened after kickball. And it wasn't something that happened. There was something else going on. Right. And that's when I got intrigued. I'm like, what the hell is it? And that's when I started studying everything I could find.
It's interesting. Do you work with kids now at all? I know you train a lot of adults, but do you ever work with children?
Right. I don't anymore. I've got experience of that over the years, but no, I don't. Except my greats, my great grandkids.
Right, your greats.
Yeah.
They must love you. Oh,
they do. They think I'm the shit.
You are the shit. Can I call it? How old are you? I'm sorry.
I'm 70. I turned 70 in August. I know.
You are just radiant. Like, I know, because I know a lot of people listening to this podcast, watching this, could be over 70, and you're an inspiration in that. And I guess I want to stick to the kid thing for a second. I recently read that one of the challenges that's going on, I think for a long time, no one ever did any therapy, right? And now we're at a time where young people are doing therapy much more often.
Yeah.
And this generation Z, or I don't know what they are, but these, and I have 2 young children, by the way. My kids are 9 and 7. They're having the most mental health problems of any generation.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it's screen addiction, which I'm a huge, I call myself a screen addict. And I think that's like the biggest issue right now. But it's also that, so what I was reading was they find that kids that are focusing on, doing therapy versus other kids that are just doing actions like sports or yoga or something. And that thinking about your negative state, like depression or anxiety or whatever it is, or identity crisis or whatnot, was not making the symptoms go away. Mm-hmm. But that doing an action like yoga, doing like, and I'll try to put the study in the show notes. I think it was more, I forget what the action they said it was, but I would just wonder what your thoughts are on that today with kids. Do you have grandkids? What are your thoughts on how we're going to keep these kids sane?
I love this. And it really ties into the addiction work, right? What you're speaking to. It really ties into the addiction work. Since its beginning, Y12SR, the work that I do, since its very beginning, and its very beginning is like the early 2000s, right? I lose track of when it was with the early, but the theme of Y12SR has always been the issues live in our tissues. The issues live in our tissues. Right now, I often get asked, did I come up with that? And I don't know. I don't, probably not, because nothing is original. I know that. But I remember when I really had that realization, right? And the realization happened after my second relapse, right? So I was clean for 8 years, then I relapsed. I was clean for another 4 years, then I relapsed again.
And was this before or after you became a yoga teacher?
One was before. Actually, one was before. No, actually, both were when I was a yoga teacher. Both.
Okay, so but I just mean that this. Go ahead, just keep going with the story. I apologize.
Okay, that's all right. That's all right. So, there's, again, like we do most things in the world of humanity, we've got this matrix that we've talked about, right? Good, bad, right, and we box everything. Everything fits.
Little kids are always saying, "Is this good? Is this bad?"
Right. We put things in these boxes, and one of the things that I think that we're doing, and repeating this over and over again, is we separate, right, the mental from the physical. We separate, right? Yoga talks about we got 5 bodies, right? And we put them in separate little boxes, and there's no integration between them. And like one of the things that we do in the Y12SR space, it's the marrying or this combination of the cognitive and the somatic. What the real juice of the work is that it's the joined cognitive and somatic, right? That those two things are at least those two things, really many more, but those two things are married. And what I see happening in the world today, one gets elevated. So now for kids, we're elevating, going to therapists and doing this work early and all that. And we forget, we don't join with that, the other piece.
The other piece, like the cognitive base, or what is the opposite side of that? Is it the
body? Right. The work that you're talking, the action, right? When those two things are combined to work through something, it's a different effect than when they're separated. What we do is elevate one and diminish the other,
or separate them. Like you can go to a yoga class, but then separately you can just talk about your feelings and your thoughts and stuff. Instead of like putting yourself in that peaceful state, that grounded state, and then being able to tap into truth and source and
exactly. And that was what was missing for me, and why I kept relapsing. Part of why I kept relapsing over and over again. We live in humanity. Intellect is elevated over everything else, right? And nothing wrong with intellect. Thank God for that. It's not good, bad, right, wrong, right?
Right.
But there's not a superiority, right? And you look at that, it's the same thing that kind of replicates itself over many systems, right? We have this thing that we are the ultimate of nature. And we've forgotten how entangled we are with everything else in nature. We're just other animals that are walking this planet, right? And so,
Surely. So going back to your story a bit, you were asked to teach, you taught this class, it
yeah,
lit you up.
lit me
And
up.
then did you pursue yoga teacher training, or how did you, because you're someone who gets a lot, who's highly credentialed. Like,
Yeah.
who did you do your teacher training with?
I did my first teacher training here in Indianapolis. That is a yoga studio that's no longer there, but it's where it was located is less than 2 miles from where I live. And it was fascinating, right? I started though the depth of study with the Ashtanga teacher that I was talking about.
You were studying like sutras and stuff, or
Right. The first book, one of the first books that she introduced me to was The Heart of Yoga, right? The Heart of Yoga, right?
Beautiful.
And I read it from cover to cover. And as I was reading it, you know, I'm in recovery at this point in 12-step program, right? And I'm reading it and I'm going, damn, that sounds like the 12-step program, right? And I turn another page. I go, well, damn, that sounds like the 12-step program. And so I kept making all of these similarities and seeing all these similarities between what I was reading in The Heart of Yoga and 12-step program. And that's when I got really deep, but then I went off the deep end. I decided that this was all I needed. I didn't need the 12-step program anymore, right? And I end up in relapse.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wait, was your relapse like bad, or was it kind of like, you know, how do you define? Because I have friends that, a lot of friends got to yoga through sobriety, right? Or they found yoga. I know people, I won't out them or anything, but I know some people that had serious drug and alcohol addictions.
Yeah.
They then became yogis, became yoga teachers, taught yoga for 20 years.
Yeah.
And some of them, most of them are still sober, but some of them kind of shifted and said, you know what, I actually can now handle this, you know?
Right.
And I don't know, you know, was it like a bad break? Was it a bad relapse, or was it like you had one drink and then you call that a relapse?
Yeah, mine was, right? You know, the other thing that goes along with that is things after my experiences in the street and all that, things started coming back into my life after I got clean. So my kids were separated from me. So I got my kids back. I got the car back. I went back to school. I got my master's degree. That was when, you know, I finished my undergrad, and I finished my undergrad with straight A's. I thought I had a little bit of stuff going on. I did this master's degree. I got this great job. And so all these material things started coming back into my life. Right. And I'm deep in the study of yoga, and, I always think of this, like the quote that I know as I know it came from Malcolm X. Right. And the quote is, once you think you got it, you lost it. Right. And so, I thought I had this thing. Right. I thought, I don't have to worry about this anymore. And I ended up on a business trip, and I was in Germany, right? And things didn't go well on the way to the business trip. 12-step will say, don't let yourself get hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, because you're likely, when you're in any one of those nervous system states, right, you're likely to make bad decisions. And I was all of those things, and I made a bad decision. And then it was kind of off to the races again. So I stayed out for a while, right? And finally came back to Boston, finally, after, I left Germany and went to Amsterdam.
Oh, so you went on a pretty big bender. At least you can check it off the bucket list. Oh man, I'm sorry.
Exactly, right. And then and then finally had to get some help to get back home.
Mm,
And I did, and so it was that kind of process for me.
that was a big one. That was a true relapse. Wow. And
Yeah,
so, okay, so you were working in business at the time. You had your MBA. You were, I don't know what
right,
you were doing,
right.
but
Yeah.
when did you make the full-time switch to yoga?
I made the full-time switch. So that was relapse number one. There was another relapse, right? So I stayed clean 8 years, then I relapsed, and then I came back and I stayed clean for 4 years, and then I relapsed again. And that's it. It was after that second relapse that I realized that I was holding things in these boxes. I had
And
not really integrated the yoga with the recovery.
they were like
In
two
what
separate vasanas in your brain, right? They weren't like, there was the yoga mode, and then there was the I can be,
that's
an emotional
exact.
wreck mode,
I
right?
can be commercial. I can be what the world of humanity, I can be in that identity and separate that identity from everything else.
Wait, so when you was it the separation of those two things that led you to break down, or
Yep.
and can do you is there any do you want to share that story, or what was that like? Do you remember?
Yeah, right. Because there was a part of me that looked really good, right?
Mm,
And that's kind of where that introduction came from, right? I'm an MBA. Got the credentials. I'm a yoga teacher. I got the credentials. But there
right.
was this other part of me that I hadn't integrated, right? There were all these other stories, and I had those identities held in, because the world says those are bad, awful, and wrong, right?
Hmm.
So there was this internal fight that was going on. There was this internal war that was going on. When I think about that, this was kind of described in the Disney movie Inside Out. I
Oh
don't know if
yeah,
you,
I think is that
yes,
where there's like the five little beings in her head?
all those little beings in her head. And when they ignored one piece,
Hmm.
right, that's when she came out fighting, right? She
Hmm.
came out, you're not going to ignore me,
Right.
right? And it was through inclusion, when they included all the pieces, that then there was a possibility to live in some kind of harmony.
Did you do like parts work therapy or
I
anything
did
like that?
not. I did not. So parts work has had different, it's been around forever, right? But it has different times when it comes to the forefront and is the focus of emphasis. I
Right.
did not, and I didn't know anything about parts work at all. And I've been introducing myself that way. And what it describes is parts work. I
Hmm.
got that from the study of Vedanta.
From
I
Vedanta. Yeah.
From Vedanta. That's
How did
exactly
you
right.
get, where did you get, how did you get, sorry, how did you get that from Vedanta?
Well, it's kind of like what I was talking about before. The Divine Mother has 1,000 names.
Hmm.
And those names, some of those names are fierce. Some of those names are beautiful and but it's not all sunshine and lollipops and it's not all that, right? And it's all the Divine Mother. All of those pieces are the Divine Mother.
How freeing is it to be able to just share freely about your past?
It's been such an integral part of wholeness, of coming back, not that I am there or any of that yet, but what I know the job is subtraction, right?
Hmm.
That I'm chipping away by recognizing and acknowledging all the parts, right? And honoring all the parts. I'm chipping away at all that is not me, so I can come back to the wholeness of who it is that I truly am. And that work has been so freeing. That work has been so, and continues to be, just so, it's the liberation, right? It's the work, it's the work of the Kamalia.
Of freedom, yeah. Of what. So let's keep going with your story, because I think it's going to tie in with this Kavalia. Like you had this second relapse, and you realized the issues were in your tissues. What was that about, and how did that kind of take you to the next level?
Over the course, I'd done a lot of therapy, right? And therapy's great. It's fabulous and all of that kind of stuff. But I did find that you can almost re-traumatize yourself. One can re-traumatize ourselves.
Like giving too much energy to the past stories.
Right.
Yeah.
To the story. And story is great, right? But I recognized I wasn't coming to any neutrality. There was some flow, right? And what the asana does, and what the meditation work and pranayama does, it creates, something was stuck, right? And so there are common places in the body where things can get stuck in that way. And so bringing the conscious, intentional work from my therapy and from my 12-step work, from all that cognitive work to the mat, in the way that I've been taught now, to bring them to the mat.
What do you mean by that? Sorry. Can you just go a little deeper into that?
Work with places that I know that energy gets stuck, right?
Like you feel it in your body, like when you're having an emotion and you feel it in your body, and then when you're on the mat, you focus on that area of your body? Sometimes just common areas. Well, particularly when I'm working one-on-one with someone, it's more like what you're speaking about. Okay. When I'm working in a group, I know that there are common places in the body that the issues get stuck in our tissues. Yes. Right. So I'm looking to create flow, right? In air, to release obstacles, to release what's stuck. Right. I'm taught that trauma is stuck energy, right? Yeah. Trauma is stuck energy, and it lives in the body. I have a question for you. I think the understanding of trauma nowadays, like from, I forget, what was Bessel van der Kolk's book? The Body Keeps Score. The Body Keeps the Score, yeah. That, and like you said, the issues are in the tissues. We have this traumatic experience. We store it in our body as tension, or whether it's in our brain and it causes tension in our body, whatnot. Is yoga and spiritual practice doing like almost the opposite of that? Like instead of storing a tension experience or a tension memory or an anxious memory, could yoga be storing a positive memory? And like, is there a spiritual experience that, like Dharma Mitra calls it the backup light, or in the Yoga Sutras, once you've experienced Asamprajnata Samadhi, like first level of Samadhi, it's like, you've got this backup light, this positive, the opposite of a trauma, like a positive, helpful trauma. Is there something like that in your work? Does that concept ring true to you? Yeah. And it's kind of back to something that we were talking about a little earlier. By doing that work and creating flow in the body. Yes. As well as in the mind, which is because the bigger yoga works across all 5 bodies, right? And that's the 5 body models from the
Taittiriya Upanishad, the Panchamaya Kosha.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Well,
physical body, energy body,
layers.
monkey mind, wisdom mind, bliss body.
Right. And they're really layers. They're not so much bodies that they're layers. Right. And really, they're all one thing. It's really all the same thing. That's a model. And it's a useful model as a way to describe things. So I lost my train of thought. Shit.
Oh, I'm sorry. We were talking about how it started with talking how we figured out the issues, how you figured out this concept of issues in the tissues, and then how you're talking about healing blocked energy through yoga as opposed to therapy work. But then also I kind of added a layer, which is probably why we got off track, around can we do both? Is the yoga also creating the anti-trauma? Is it the antidote to trauma?
Got it. And I was saying from Yoga Sutras, what I learned from Yoga Sutras, and it's kind of like what we were talking about, hypo homeostasis.
Right. Yeah,
or right. The experience doesn't go away, but by creating flow, it's not stuck anymore in a place. And I'll give you a little example of that from my own life. And the Yoga Sutra says, I think this is in the first chapter near the end of the first pada of the yoga. It's around 49, someplace between 49 and 50 in the end. I think it's someplace.
I'll find it. I always have one handy.
It talks about how it becomes neutral. There's no charge related to that memory. When the memory loses its charge. So for me, it's why now I can talk about commercial sex work, right? It gets back to that. It's why that memory and because believe me, some suffering happened in the course of what I was doing. And that suffering happened, believe that. But now as I speak to it, there's no charge related to that anymore. I can speak to commercial sex work like I talk about driving a Toyota, right? It's
something that I do or that I did.
Yeah, it's neutral. It's neutral. And that is when I know that there's flow, because the memory itself is neutral. And now I can use it in a different way. It happened. And what happened, but there's no charge associated with that thing anymore. And that's what we look to do, create this bigger capacity, right? So that energy can move. Energy is meant to move. It's not meant to stay stuck. The nature of energy is to move, right? And so that's what we do with the work on the mat.
So when did you start incorporating the yoga into the 12 steps?
It was after that second relapse, right? When I realized that I had them boxed, right? And that, 12-step work, they talk about the committee. And really, there's work now. I don't know. She's become a really good friend. Do you know Jill Bolte Taylor?
No. Oh, Jill Taylor? That name sounds familiar.
You know it. Yeah. She's the woman who is a neuroscientist who had a stroke and watching it was.
Oh, yeah. She did the TED Talk. Yeah.
She's a really good friend of mine now. Right. And her newest book is called Whole Brain Living. And what she talks about was as she recovered, this is a neuroscience who's watching her brain go through a stroke, right? And she knows all these structures and she knows what's going on and she's watching herself go through it, right? And she comes out of it where her whole left side is offline. She can't walk, she can't move, she can't do anything. So long story short, in the course of her recovery, she identifies, right, what's going on each side of the brain, right, in the left and right sides. Even though the structures mirror each other, you know, we respond very differently in the world depending on which one has the mic, right?
Yes. Which one has the mic? I like that.
Right. Which part has the mic? And so I had been introducing myself the way that I introduced myself for years, right? And then I noticed that the way I talk about where I put the ands describe each one of these structures that she speaks about in that book, in the brain. And we started comparing notes and we started talking and all that kind of stuff. Fascinating stuff. But the idea with 12-step is 12-step talks about you got a committee up here. There's a committee, right? And the idea is, how can I have the committee work in harmony rather than having the committee be in fight and chaos and disharmony all the time, right? And their practices from yoga and the 12 steps and, you know, these other that help this committee work in harmony, right? Help us make decisions from a board of directors up here that's in harmony rather than in fight. Yeah, it's fascinating.
So on a very practical level, someone's listening to this podcast and they're like, maybe they're struggling with addiction, or even if they haven't named and claimed their addiction, if they live in the modern world and have a cell phone, they're struggling with something. And especially if we get into how you define codependency, I don't think there's anyone that doesn't fall under that moniker.
Patanjali would say that too, Andrew. I think Patanjali at its heart says we're all addicted to the way we process our reality. We all look at life through a lens.
Right. Patanjali says either we sit in the self-abiding or we see things through the lens of the kosha, you know, the kleshas, right?
Yeah.
The first 4 sutras of the Yoga Sutras are my favorite.
Absolutely.
You know, either yoga's chitta vritta nirodhad, or and then we sit in our true nature, or we sit in the vrittis.
Right.
But that being said, so for the non-yoga initiates listening to this, I think the heart of what we're saying right here, and what Nikki, what you talked about in another talk I've listened to you give, is that whenever we try to fulfill the hole in the soul, as you call it, with something outside of ourselves, we are living in avidya, non-knowledge, as the yogis would call it, of our true nature, which is already whole.
Already there.
And so that's the kind of the problem and the solution, as you've explained it. Though the problem is we've lost that sense of wholeness. The solution is to find it again. And then you talk sometimes about plan of action. What are your practical plans of action that you would offer for anyone listening to this podcast, and kind of where do you go next with that?
This is, I'm going to speak about it first from big picture, because it always helps me. You know, the 12-step program again says it's through understanding and application that it works, right? And I love those two. It's through understanding and sometimes a big picture gives me more of an understanding, right? And so part of the big picture of this, given, you know, the conversation that we've already had here, you know, in the course of our conversation together, this quote comes from one of my teachers, right? So one of my teachers in the course of yoga and yoga philosophy, and where I did my yoga therapist work, is with Vinny Yoga, right? With the Vinny Yoga Institute.
Gary.
Gary was my teacher.
Gary Kratzow, direct student of Krishnamacharya.
That's my teacher, right? Which was always so funny for me
You've always
because
been in that line. I didn't realize
I've
that's
been
your
in that
lineage. You are
line.
Krishnamacharya, Patabi Joyce, like Deskachar.
I've
That
been
that
in that line,
that's your
right?
line. Oh, wow.
Right. And it found me. That
Yeah.
line found me. Right.
Right.
And so Gary will say it this way, and I love it. And it is a plan of action. Examining our conditioning is our ticket to freedom. Right.
Examining
And I
our
love that.
conditioning.
Examining our conditioning is our ticket to freedom. We're divinity when we come in here, right? I usually show in my teachings this picture of one of my great granddaughters, right? And I'm holding her at 2 hours old. And I'm just holding her there, and I'm looking in her eyes, and I'm going, this is wholeness. This is wholeness. And you can see it, and she, at that point, she doesn't know girl, boy, right? She doesn't know nose from toes. She's just this little piece of wholeness that has come from wholeness. It's that chant, Purnamada, Purnamidam, Purnam Udachate, Udachate, and right, and the rest of that. And whenever you chant that, Purnam Purnat, it means infinite, wholeness, all of that, right? And the chant says, you are wholeness, I am wholeness, and then these words. And wholeness from wholeness is wholeness. When wholeness is taken from the whole, wholeness still remains. Wholeness still remains. And then you start getting programmed, right? We come into this plane of existence. She gets told, you're a girl, right? Girls do this, right? Girls don't do that. Girls do this, right? She gets programmed into the binary matrix, the binary, right? And it happens from the minute we come into the human plane of existence, right? We start getting programmed, right? And the job is, right, examining our condition, not to say that that's good or bad or right or wrong, right? Some of that's very necessary to live, and it's still conditioning, right? And the idea is examining our conditioning is our ticket to freedom, right? Going back through and examining our conditioning is our ticket to freedom. And that's the big picture piece for this. For me, it's kind of like, what I was told anyway about Michelangelo and the David. He saw the David in the stone, and his job was chipping away all that really is not David, right? And so, it's kind of that work, that is the base of the work at the individual level and at the collective level, right? And at the collective level, our work is examining, we got so much conditioning, right? At the collective level, which influences politics, which influences all of those kinds of things, that work is both individual and collective in examining our conditioning.
How do you do? And by the way, how are you on time? We're at an hour and 10 minutes. This has been really fun.
It's been great. I love it.
Thank you.
We're doing the dregs.
Yeah.
I love it. Yes.
So the dregs of wisdom, by the way, is that there's a story, an old Taoist story about this wheelwright, Payan, the wheelwright. He's an old man, and he makes wheels. He makes wagon wheels. And this Duke comes by, who's very kind of foolhardy Duke that's known for chopping people's heads off who insult him and stuff. And he's sitting in the courtyard reading the classics, reading Confucius. And old Payan's kind of like, no one can tell him what to do. He's too old. He doesn't give a shit anymore, And he just walks up to the Duke in the yard and he's like, hey, what you reading? And he says, this is the book of the, this is the works of the great ones, or something like that. And he goes, I don't think that's the work of the great ones. That's just the dregs they left behind. And then he almost gets killed for it. But then he goes on to explain, as a wheelwright, I could tell my son, how to hold the wheel just right. I can tell him how to push too hard or push too soft or whatever. But the actual experience of it is where my enlightenment is, to create this perfect wheel. And I feel like all of us, we're all kind of seekers, on this path, and we're pulling little dregs out of the truths, from all these great wisdom traditions. And I guess we're also dredging, like you said, we're kind of cutting.
Yeah.
Yeah. How much time do you want to leave us with one more dreg of wisdom?
Oh,
is there a
my
special
goodness.
dreg that you'd like to share?
Where I'll just share where my deepest inquiries are within me right now.
Beautiful.
Part of this separation that we've been talking about is this superiority that manifests in different layers and different levels as you look through the matrix. But one of them at the heart is how we put humanity above everything else, that we forget that we are nature, that we are part, and just the depth of the entanglement, right, of everything, right, is just, it continues to unpack and unfold and just be absolutely fascinating, to me. How we put humanity above all that, forgetting, for example, that trees communicate in community, they have a community and a language and a communication, right? And we've kind of taken that kind of wisdom and said, oh, we're these big people, we can think and we can, all of that kind of, and separated all that stuff, right? And just, it continues to unfold that if we're really going to heal, right, that the level of healing comes with inclusion. Healing happens through inclusion. Healing doesn't happen through exclusion. Healing happens with inclusion, right? And so, that's been just a continual unfolding and continues to deepen and unfold for me. And, recognizing that even death is a part of that, right? And that sometimes, right. We put death in the good, bad, right, wrong continuum, right? But death is a part of that circle, right? And, the older I get, of course, that's recognizing that, as one of my teachers says, this is compost. That's what this is compost.
This is compost.
Right. And so
an abode of suffering.
Right. This is compost, right? And so, just being in that level of depth, how can we really be in this healing about this recognition that in more ways than we can possibly think about, and not just with humanity and each other, that we really are all a part of this same thing, right? We're all a part of the same thing. So that's kind of where I am in the depth of inquiry.
Well, fascinating. I gotta say, on that little front, you might really enjoy meeting Andrew Faust at the festival, who's teaching on permaculture.
I love it.
Because I think if you, like when you were sharing that about this inquiry that you're in now, about how even our goal is to get more inclusive and even more connected, really more connected, even to the trees, to nature, then we have such a long way to go. Like lifetimes before society and the world is going to like really work in that way. I think you're someone who I just feel when I listen to you talk, or when I get to spend time with you, that, you are like emanating something wonderful. In the Tao, we say we're either moving towards the good or we're moving towards that which is not.
Mhm.
And the good is the full embracing of the darkness and the light. It's not. So I think I'm grateful for you giving us some time today, and I look forward to practicing with you at the festival this summer. And where else can people find you if they want to learn more about your work? And we can put everything in the description as well.
I love it. Just go to why12sr.com, right? And we've recently changed the focus of Why12SR, because it's not just about the 12-stepper program. It's not just about 12 step. They're also, we're working on in this whole domain of addiction, programs that relate to harm reduction. There are programs specifically that relate to maybe cognitive behavioral therapy, and how you integrate this work if you're not, for whatever reason, inclined toward the 12 steps. There are other ways to incorporate this work. So we changed the name to a little bit to Y12, right? It really is about catalyzing our energies in order to heal all addictions, and especially our addiction to the way we process our reality, right? That whole thing, right? And so, so just go to Watch12SR or Y12, and you'll find everything, that we're currently working on. And there's some other things that are unfolding I'd invite people to pay attention to. But I wanted to say, to see it, you gotta have it, right? So right, I from our first conversation, right, which was at a long time ago at one of it was the Black yoga teachers.
Oh, at Kripalu, the Black yoga teachers. I was the only white guy. Oh no, there was a couple other people, but
yeah.
They had me speak at the Black
But
yoga.
we had a lunchtime conversation there.
I remember that.
I do too. And from that moment, I recognized that there was a depth with you and in you, right, that would have a podcast like the Dregs of Wisdom, right? You were that guy, right? Into the Dregs. So I want to thank you for your work, and I'm so looking forward to the yoga festival. You have no idea, right?
Oh, we're gonna have fun.
I know. And just how to reframe and how to work with this stuff, in order to, I always think of my superpower, if you will, as taking the theoretical and turning it into the practical, right? How it is that we can really, really for real live this stuff and work and turning it into the practical. And I'm so looking forward to being with other people who are of that same kind of idea and walking toward that at this festival, because this is the place where I'm of course, imagining and contemplating and just knowing you, that it's the place where we're going to go deep.
Yeah, I think it will be. And that's what we're trying to create. My hope is at least 500 to 700. That's what we're on pace for, like real depth yoga practitioners getting together in one place. And then we're also going to be inviting the community, the Berkshire community. There's going to be free events for them. So we could have a couple thousand additional people, especially if the weather's nice, which it usually is at that time of year. And yeah, for the transformative work. And I'm definitely going to be in one of your classes for sure.
Yay.
So
Yay.
thank you. All right, we're gonna close it out. Stay with me, Nikki, for a minute as we close out.
Okay.
Peace.